Hey, Shabbat Shalom. So excited to be back with you guys. It is always a blessing to come and learn with you. This week's Torah portion, Ki Tisa, we're going to learn about the significance of community, of lifting up the heads, the numbers 541. What is the deeper meaning there connected to the meaning of Israel? We're going to jump into this, look at some cool things in the Hebrew. So this week's Torah portion begins Exodus 30, verse 11. I'm coming to you from Orlando, Florida. God's doing some cool things down here, was doing some filming that will be excited for you to check out. We were on with Paula White. So good times here in Florida. So this is what it says. Then the Lord said to Moses, when you take a census of the Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a ransom for his life at the time he is counted. Then no plague will come upon them when you number them. So this is where we begin. Each one who crosses over to those already counted is to give a half shekel according to the sanctuary shekel as an offering to the Lord. What's significant is that in the Torah, God counts Israel not one, not two, not three, but actually four times. And the question is, why is so much time devoted to counting the children of Israel? What is the significance there? Because there's so much space given to it, and as compared to other things that seem more significant. So what is the deeper spiritual reason? And the children of Israel, which we have to understand, is the children of Israel were slaves 400 years in Egypt, and as such their lives counted for very little. They did not have great value as individuals or as a people in the sight of the Egyptians. The Egyptians despised them and looked down upon them. And in all probability, they struggled to think of themselves in a healthy way. That's why there's so much grumbling and fighting, and why they reject Moses at first. They have that slave mentality, and they're struggling with their identity. They're struggling with seeing their value and with their self-esteem, much like all of us do at times. So this is why God counted them, because by counting them continually, God was communicating that they were precious to him, because you only count what's valuable for you. You only keep track of things that have worth. And so the people and relationships are the most valuable thing to God. And that's why he keeps counting them. He's saying to the children of Israel, you count. And in the same way, God gave his son to die for you because he wants you to know that you count. I want you to say, I count. I have infinite value in Messiah. And that's so important. We talk about identity a lot because it's so foundational. And I got to tell you that one of the most hurtful things is to not be counted. And I've experienced this a number of times. I'll never forget, right? See, what you have to understand is that in the Jewish community, in the Orthodox Jewish community, traditional Jewish community, you need 10 men age 13 or older, bar mitzvah and older, to make a prayer quorum known as a minyan. So when you pray, you really need to have a minimum. In the Orthodox community, it has to be men. In the other Jewish communities, like congregations like Reform or Conservative, could be men or women. But in the traditional Jewish community, it's 10 men. And you can only read from the Torah scroll if there's 10. You can only say certain prayers if there's 10. And so they always try and make sure there's a minimum of 10. And I'll never forget, one day I had an office in Malibu at one time. We had a community in Malibu. And I was walking, there was a kosher restaurant right next to my office, and there was also a synagogue. And the rabbi came out and he said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we need a tenth for a minyan. Can you join us?" And one of the guys took the rabbi aside and told him who I was. And they didn't want to count me because I'm a Jewish follower of Yeshua. Basically, they were saying, "Well, you're not really Jewish, so you can't count." And they were excluding me from the count and from the community. And I can tell you that's happened to me more than once. That's happened to a number of my friends, being excluded in the count, being removed from the synagogue because of our Yeshua faith. And it hurts. I mean, I remember in school, like sometimes I was picked last for the team, for the kids at recess, right? And that hurts. But being picked on and told that you have no value, that you don't count as part of the community, as an individual, or to the family, it really hurts. And God knows that. And God knew the pain of what it feels like. He knew what the children of Israel were going through when they felt they were just slaves in Egypt and coming out and wrestling with all that meant, because it's horrible to feel you don't belong, you're not wanted, or you're not welcomed. And as we read in Exodus 30:11, this week's Torah portion, when you take a census of the children of Israel, and what it actually says in the Hebrew, and this is really incredible. This is the beauty of the Hebrew. It says, "Ki tisa et rosh." What it literally says is when you raise up the head of the children of Israel, when you lift up the heads of the children of Israel. See, it's often translated in English as when you take a census or when you count the children of Israel, but it literally says ki tisa et rosh, when you lift up, when you raise up the heads of the children of Israel. And this indicates, this word tisa comes from the word nasa, meaning to lift up, to raise up. And it indicates that the Lord wanted to elevate and encourage each of the children of Israel through the process of counting them and taking censuses, right? He wants the children of Israel, he wants his kids to know, hey, hold your heads up high. Be proud of who you are. I just want to tell you, some of you all are discouraged and you're living with your heads bowed and you feel bad about yourself and you're ashamed of certain things about yourself. And it's been hard. But I want to tell you, it's time to humbly hold your head up. Say, I am going to humbly hold my head up. Right now, I want you to lift up your head. Lift up your head. You are not a reject. You are not a loser. You have nothing to be ashamed of. No matter how you feel about different parts of yourself, external or internal, physically, spiritually, or emotionally, right? When you believe in Yeshua, you are a child of the King. And when God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, he brought us up standing up straight with our heads up. This was the opposite, the exact opposite of what the children of Israel had lived under. This is what Leviticus 23:13 says. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enable you to walk with your heads held high. God is saying, I have brought you out. I have broken the yoke over your life. And I have broken the yoke, and you're to walk with your head held high, just like the children of Israel. Think about how radical that was. Slaves never look at their masters. Slaves keep their heads down. Slaves don't look into the eyes of their owners or people in greater powers, just like this, right? I'm trying to role play that for you. But God says, no, I'm lifting up your heads. I want you to lift up your heads. When you're in Messiah, you have to understand, you have to live with your heads held high because God broke the bars of your yoke. Yeshua has taken the yoke. He broke the yoke. It's no joke. And so the question is, do you live a life in which you're primarily looking down? Or do you live a life where your head is held high? And let me tell you why we have to live with our head held high. Because if you're living with your head looking down, you're a rooster, right? Pecking at the ground. When you live with your head held high, you're an eagle. You're soaring in the sky. But more importantly, right? Don't be an eagle. Don't be a rooster. Be an eagle. Say, I'm an eagle, not a rooster. Be an eagle, not a rooster. And so, but here's part of the reason why. The same word ki tisa, lift up the heads, et ki tisa et rosh, lift up the heads of the Bnei Israel, of the children of Israel, right? What we have to understand is this is the same word that says in the Psalms, Esa enai el harim may I in Yahweh Isri. Esa enai, I lift my eyes. It's the same word. I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? We live with our heads held high. We live with our eyes looking up because we're looking to heaven. We're looking to Yeshua, the one who was lifted up for our sake. You were chosen by God. Say, I have been chosen by God. As many as believe, he has given them the right to become the children of God. You count because you're a member of God's people, because Yeshua gave his life for you. You count. People count. God's people, all of God's people count. You are valuable to him. All of us want to live meaningful lives. But in order to feel like our life has meaning and is meaningful, we need to feel that we as individuals really matter. And this can be hard. We all struggle at times with our self-worth and with our self-esteem. And often it's hard to believe that our life really counts for something. Healthy spiritual community helps combat these feelings. And when when God raises up their head, he's doing it in the context of community. So by lifting up their heads, the Lord was literally trying to elevate his people spiritually and emotionally. That's part of our responsibility. The word for nasa in Hebrew means to lift up. It's also the word for connected to the word nasi, to be the leaders of the 12 tribes, or the president of Israel is called a nasi, because the essence of leadership is lifting up other people around you. So many people try and elevate themselves by stepping on the back of others, by trying to lower them, to put them down so that they can lift themselves up. That is not the biblical way. That is not the way of Yeshua. The way of Yeshua is that we should be those individuals that are constantly lifting up, encouraging, and building up the individuals who are around us. And the amazing thing here is that the, the rabbis believe that what we read in the five books of Moses, it's not always in chronological order. I mean, from the time of the going out of Egypt, right? You have these laws dropped in the midst of the narrative story of what God's doing with the children of Israel. And so it's not, all of it is not in chronological order. So the rabbi, according to the rabbi, so the rabbis say this census that we read about in this week's Torah portion actually took place after the sin of the golden calf, which we read about later in this week's Torah portion. But the question is, why then does God take the census after the sin of the golden calf? Because God wants the children of Israel to know that he still loves them, that even though they blew it, that even though they messed up, they can still hold their head high. Even when you mess up, even when you sin, you're still God's child. and you can hold your head up. 1 John 1:9. If anyone confesses his sin, God, he is faithful to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. That's really good news. The children of Israel, think about it, they just received the 10 commandments and then commit the sin of the golden calf. Heard God speak to them at Sinai, the fire, the thunder, the miracles in Egypt, the manna from heaven, and they're still messed up. They're still in process. God is still trying to take Egypt out of the children of Israel, even though He'd already taken them out of Egypt. He's still trying to take Egypt out of their hearts and minds and emotions and spirit. And all of us have Egypt in us. And all of us are in that process of coming out of Egypt. It is a lifelong process. You're going to mess up. You're going to struggle. There's going to be yokes in your life that need to be broken. There's going to be things in your life that you need freedom from, and that's part of the process. But the good news is that He loves you and He values you, and lift your head up. And that's the beauty of being part of the people of God, the children of God, the community of faith, being part of a local community, being part of this fusion learning community, right? Because we count more collectively. We count more when we are together as a community, as a family, because all of us can add to each other's greatness. All of us can add to each other's worth. And this is the importance of community. Community helps to make our lives count more, because all of us want our lives to count for something. All of us desire to make an impact on the world. Every one of us should desire to leave the world better than when we found it. And this comes through service, through serving in community, serving God's people, serving the world around us. And all of us have something to add to the community. And this is what helps give our life meaning. Think about it. Esther was queen in the palace, but she risked her life for the community. By the way, we're coming up on the holiday of Purim that celebrates. We're in the month of Adar, the month of Purim, not too far from now. Moses left the palace of Egypt because he was defending his brethren. And he risked everything to leave his nice, quiet life with, with Jethro and his wife to take the children of Israel out of Egypt. Why? Because each one of us have a calling and a mission and a purpose, but it involves other people. It involves helping others. It involves a community. But there's another reason why spiritual community and being part of a tribe, right? We like to call it the fusion tribe, is so important. And that's because being part of something bigger than yourself with other people is part of what brings growth and transformation to us as individuals. And that's underscored in this week's Torah portion, because I want you to see this, because I feel like people read like the census and they read these passages in the Torah and the 5 books of Moses, and they're like, man, they don't see any value in it. But there's value in all of it. There's value in the sense that in some way it all points to the Messiah, but there's value in it also because there's wisdom for our lives. So again, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take a census of the children of Israel, according to their numbers, every man shall give the Lord an atonement for his soul when counting them. This is why part of the reason why it says it takes place after the sin of the golden calf, because they're making an atonement for their soul. What atonement? Because they contributed to the golden calf, to the gold to make it. Now they're contributing not to an idol that they're going to worship. Now they're contributing to the building of the house of God, where God's Shekhinah, his presence, is going to dwell, so that there will not be a plague among them. They will give everyone who passes through the census a half shekel of the sacred shekel. From 20 years of age and up, they shall give the portion to the Lord. The wealthy shall not increase, and the destitute shall not decrease from a half shekel. So, why does the Torah demand a half shekel? And the most common understanding of it is that the Torah demands one half of a unit of currency from the rich and poor alike because it hints that every individual, rich or poor, has something to contribute. They've been given a task, but each one of us only has part. And we need the contribution of the other to make it whole. Each one of us only has a fraction of the total picture. Each one of us only has a fraction of the total resources. Each person needs the other to achieve their spiritual purpose in life and to achieve the goals that God created them for. We need each other. We can't accomplish our mission and purpose without the help of others. We need the community. We need other people. We need rabbis and pastors and teachers and friends and spiritual mothers and fathers, and we need to be able to receive and we need to be able to give. We need the spiritual, material, emotional support and encouragement that comes from community. That's why Ecclesiastes says two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion, but woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. Two are better than one. A better return for the labor. To lift you up when times are tough, to lift you up when you fall. And I was just exploring this, right? A threefold cord cannot be broken, is what it goes on to say. A cord of three strands is not quickly torn apart, is what it goes on to say in Ecclesiastes. So what I realized, what I found out is a three strand rope that's interwoven together is 10 to 15 times stronger than a single strand rope, than a double strand. And a double strand rope would be twice as strong as a single strand, but a triple strand is 10 to 15 times stronger. The simple truth is that there is strength and wisdom in numbers and in community. Think about what the Torah again says, two are better than one. With God's empowerment, one can put 1,000 to flight, which is incredible in of itself, but two, the Torah says 10,000. I mean, think about that. 1,000, but think about the multiplication effect of two putting to flight 10,000. And what's true in the spiritual is often true in the natural, and kind of what scientists are looking to achieve, right? So think about this, right? When it comes to powering the world, right, one of the greatest sources of power is nuclear energy. But nuclear energy can be dangerous, right? Because we know that nuclear energy, there, the nuclear energy contains radiation. And part of the reason for that radiation and part of the reason for the devastating effects is if like there's a nuclear meltdown. We saw what happened in Chernobyl, right? Literally the sickness and the damage and the contamination, how it kills people and the environment. Nuclear energy is created because you take atoms and you split them apart. And by the splitting apart of atoms, by breaking the atomic bonds that hold those atoms together, there is great energy that is released, but that great energy is produced by a process known as fission, but that fission creates nuclear waste. What scientists hope to be able to do and what they're working on doing, and some say they're not far from being able to do, is not fission, but fusion. The fusion is the opposite of fission. Fission is the breaking apart of atoms that creates energy. Nuclear fusion is when you release energy by bringing together two particles within the nucleus. So when you join together atoms and particles, this is what creates a greater power by the joining together. So fusion reactors would never melt down like fission reactors. Fusion reaction produces very little atomic waste. If the right atoms are chosen, no radioactive waste. So in the case of nuclear fission, there's large radioactive waste that is produced as a result. That's very dangerous. And what do you do with it? It's a complicated problem to get nuclear power. But fusion, there's almost none. It's a better choice. And the sun is the result of fusion, not fission. So if we're going to shine like the sun, then we must join together like atoms coming together, like the power in those atoms, because we have the power of the Son of the who's given us the Holy Spirit within us. When we come together and join spirits, there's a powerful reaction that creates the sunlight, SON light, that's even greater than the power of the SUN that brings love and light into the world together. So, right, coming together is much more powerful than breaking and splitting apart. The sum is greater than the parts. That's one of the reasons why we named our ministry Fusion, because we don't want to split apart. In church history, it's fission. It's split apart Jew and Gentile. It's split apart within the denominations into factions, right? But we don't want fission. There's fallout from fission. We want fusion. And that's what God has wanted to do, bring Jew and Gentile together. That's what we're doing at Fusion, connecting with all of you around the world, learning together, growing together, Jew and Gentile, different countries, different nationalities, because we want to create fusion. That's the power of fusion. It's the power of unity in community and relationship. Friends, be part of it. Be part of it. Because God wants to release his power, the power of fusion in your life through the word and through the spirit by uniting Jew and Gentile, the old and the new. That's what we're doing. And he wants to do it by us connecting, and he wants to do it through you connecting with others and being a blessing to your community, taking what you're learning and sharing and just serving those around you, being that servant leader, lifting up the heads of others. It's so important. But of course, there's more. So we're going to go a little deeper here. So in this week's Torah portion involves, as we said, the counting of the children of Israel. We talked about one of the reasons why God counted them so often, because he wanted them to know that they are valuable, that they count. But he wants to transform their identity from being slaves to becoming the royal priesthood, the Mamlechet Kohanim, that he says they are and calls them to become at Mount Sinai. And this closely mirrors the process of Jacob being transformed into Israel. So what God did for Israel, what God did for Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, God is doing for the children of Israel. And Jacob used methods of this world to try and obtain the spiritual blessing from his father, from his brother, from his uncle. But the reality is that the ways of the world will never fully lead to obtaining the promises of God. I want us to hear that. The ways of the world will never lead to us fully obtaining the promises of God. We are called to be in the world, but not of the world. We can't use worldly means. That's why Paul says we wrestle against flesh and blood. Like the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, even though we wrestle because we wrestle against flesh and blood. We can't use carnal, like man-made earthly things. But in the end, Jacob was completely changed into Israel through the process of wrestling with God. And Jacob's God-given name, his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. He actually, both names, but Israel is the name God gives him. Israel, Yisrael in Hebrew, like the nation of Israel, has the value of 541. which provides really significant insight, great insight into the process of change and transformation, because 541 is a numerical value of the phrase in Hebrew, teach me your ways. Hor'eni Adonai darchecha, Psalm 86:11. What radically changed Jacob to Israel, the foundation, was understanding the ways of God through the words of God. The commandments, ha-mitzvot, equals 541. Stone tablets, the stone tablets that Israel had the commandments written on, luchot avanim, equals 541. I will keep Eshmor in Hebrew, and I will keep your word, all add up to 541, which is the numerical value of Israel. This is no coincidence. Israel could not be transformed from a slave people to sons of God, to children of God, sons and daughters of the king, until they received the stone tablets 541 with the commandments 541 of God and learned to keep them 541. But of course, there's even more. There's other phrases that add up to 541. I will pray also adds up to 541 in Hebrew. 541, the fruit, hakarpas in Greek. 541, the Lord is in this place. Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. 541, Demuta Elohim, likeliness of God. So what does this all mean? When God's people cry out, teach me your ways, O Lord, 541, and say in their heart, I will keep 541, the commandments 541, and say, I will pray 541 to the Lord, then they will understand, like Jacob, that the Lord is in this place 541, and as a result will bear fruit 541 of the Spirit and become image bearers after the likeliness of God 541. I don't know about you, but I love it. I love the numbers. It blows my mind how these things connect together. But the truth is that all of us have a little bit of Jacob in us, in the same way that the children of Israel had a little bit of Egypt in them. But we can be transformed. You can be transformed from Jacob into Israel, one who wrestles with God and overcomes when we seek to know the Lord and his word and obey it. Obey his commandments, pray and look for God in all places and in all people. And that is key. God is in this place 541. Look for God in all places. Jacob had no idea. It just seemed like an ordinary place, but God was in it. In the same way, people look ordinary, but they're made in the likeness of God 541. That means they're not ordinary. Every person is extraordinary. Every life is a miracle. Can we see God in them? And when we do, we will want to lift up their heads. We'll want to lift up their heads. And this just struck me right now. I didn't even think about this word, but this just struck me right now. I believe this is from God, because part of what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God is that we imitate him in all of his ways. So, like God clothed the naked, he clothed Adam and Eve, so we should clothe the naked. Just like God feeds the hungry, he fed Adam and Eve, he fed the children of Israel in Egypt, he fed Elijah, right? God feeds us. We should feed the hungry. That's one of the ways we express the image of God in tangible and practical terms. And what we have to understand, we're going to see how this all connects. And we have to understand is that we read about it in the Torah portion, right? Moses was in the cleft of the rock, and he says, God, show me your glory. And what's God's response? I will cause my goodness to pass before you. Moses wanted to see the glory, and God said, I will show you my goodness. And the truth is, most people will never see the glory of God until they see the goodness of God through you and I in their lives. That's why Yeshua says, let your light shine before men, that they might see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. The goodness leads to the glorification of God, doing good. Yeshua went about doing good. He was always lifting people up. And so this is what I'm trying to say. This is what struck me even as we're talking here. God brought this verse to mind, right? He tells Moses to lift up the heads of the people by counting them. Lift them up. But this is what it says in the Psalms. He is the glory and the lifter of our head. The glory and lifter of my head. Wow. Why is that significant? Because the Psalm says God is the glory and the lifter of the head. When we lift up other people, when we lift up their heads by encouraging them, by building up, we are imitating God. We are acting like God, and we are expressing the image of God in a deeper and more meaningful and significant ways. So I just want to encourage you tonight. You have infinite worth. You are not a supplanter, a Jacob. You are an Israel. You are one who has been given the strength to wrestle with God and overcome. You have something to add to this community through your comments, through your sharing, through your praying. You have something to add to your family, to the community, to the home community that you're in, to the faith community that you're a part of. And I want to encourage you with that. Hold your head up. You have great value, and lift people up and watch God's glory move through you and work through you, and watch the miracles that happens around you as you see people's lives transformed, because you have a great calling and a great destiny as part of God's holy priesthood and his royal nation. And I just want to bless you with that here this evening from Orlando, Florida. I just want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And I just want to thank you all for your prayer and support. Listen, God is we God is getting ready to use us to, and with partnerships, to bring a whole bunch of new TV programming to TBN. I think you're going to love it. You're going to be excited about it. God has been blessing with all of these opportunities. We just did Daystar, and and now Paula White, and God's opening up other opportunities. Friends, we can't do this without you. If you've been blessed, would you like this? Would you share it? And would you consider being part of the Fusion tribe, the Fusion family, by becoming a monthly partner? And when you do, it's a blessing to you too, of course, because God blesses those who sow into the work that he's doing among the Jewish people, but also because with a monthly support, you get access to our monthly our you get access to our Fusion teaching library, resource library, Hebrew letters and numbers, lots of other stuff in there, new stuff that we're putting in there. So it's a blessing, and it allows us to create more of that to be able to give to others. And we don't say you have to, we don't charge some big amount for that, but we do it because we want you to have access to it. And if you can give, man, but we can't do this without you. We love you. We with you, Shabbat Shalom. And I just want to say over you right now, Melech Ozer Umashiach Umagan. Avinu Makenu, you are Melech Ozer Umashiach Umagan. You are our King, Helper, Savior, and Shield. And I'm just asking that God is your helper. He's going to help you lift up your head. He's going to help you do significant things for him, his kingdom. He's going to shield you as you stay close to him and walk in his ways. And I just bless you now in the name of Yeshua. Shabbat Shalom. We love you guys, and it's always a joy